episode, the Comedies Paradise podcast where we speak to tantalizing comedians from across the globe. And today's guest is Dave Bibby, an absolute scorcher of a man who's a voiceover artist, a comedian, an actor. There's nothing he can't do. And today's episode is all about how he won the Amused Comedy Awards on a tight budget. He's an absolute joy to interview. Hope you love him. How are you doing, Dave? You alright?
Yeah, good, thanks. How you getting on?
Not too bad. I want to say I'm a big fan of Jurassic Park as well.
Oh, good. Excellent. Oh, good. I've got a Jurassic. I'm so sad. I'm too old. I've got a Jurassic Park phone case coming today.
Oh,
That's sad. A man of my age. But I need a new phone case, and I was like, this one's all like broken and like it's all like rubbed away. I've had it for so long, and I was like, I didn't renew renew my contract. I went on a cheap one, and then I was like, well, I can have a new phone case.
are you going to threaten them and say, listen, I've got some raptors in the shed, so if you don't behave, watch out?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. These bad boys in. Where are you?
So I'm from the rough end of Wimbledon.
Oh, right, great.
What about
The
you?
rough end. Actually, there's such a big sliding scope in Wimbledon. To be fair, it's important. It's important to point out which end you are. I'm in Hertfordshire. I live in Welling these days. In
Okay.
Welling Garden City. I'm not from here originally from Cumbria. I grew up down south near Flitwick, near Luton, Bedford area. Lived in London and just ended up back out here when I needed a bit more space because I couldn't afford to live in London anymore.
Of course. What do you do? Are you a full-time comic or do you do other things?
I'm a full-time performer, so like I'm an actor, a comedian, presenter, voiceover. I do a lot of a big income for me is like corporate presenting sort of stuff.
Ah,
So it's sort of related. Like I was just on a call this morning about hosting an event for like a gala dinner when I'd be introducing different acts on stage and stuff like that. So it's kind of similar to comparing a comedy gig, but it's just slightly different. But yeah, so
is so. Do you, I'm guessing you gig a lot outside of London
yes,
with where you are now.
very much so. Yeah, yeah. The London circuit's shite, so I prefer to go other places.
What?
Um, uh,
Okay. What makes you say that the London circuit's shite? I mean, it is true, but go.
no, it's not shite. It's there's a couple of things that it doesn't have going for it. It's cliquey, so like it's quite sort of actually most circuits I suppose are actually most industries most things cliquey, but there's a lot of little venues that are like, oh, that'd be a good night, but they put the same people on over and over again. And then there are so many bad nights in London because there's so many comedians and so many people and so much competition, like the West End and gigs and everything else, that there are so many nights that are just not so good. So if you want to try out new material, like if you're at my level where you're like, I'm a pro performer, but I'm not a big name, I can't just say to like a huge comedy club, can I come down and do 15 minutes tonight? And they'll be like, yeah, we'd love to have Dave Bibby. It's like, no, I have to go through the same applications as everyone else. So you look at London gigs to try out new material, and some of them are just awful. And I'm just like, I can't do this anymore because I can't really try out material where it's just other comedians watching and a few like plus ones or something like that. Whereas I sort of find the rest of the country is they sort of have um, they don't have like bringer gigs and stuff like that. They don't really exist. It's just kind of like they have an audience, and then some are good, some not so good. But at least you know what you're dealing with.
But they're also they may be more appreciative because in London they're sort of spoilt for choice. And the same
Yeah,
thing is going on with like LA, New York, because everyone wants to be famous. It's the big capital, and people know that people are like that. And they're
yeah,
so, please, 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 can I go over
yeah,
here? And then the people are there, they'll take advantage because they know you're desperate. And when people know
yeah,
you're desperate,
yeah. You look at some of the rates that you'd get in and outside of London. There's so much more money in London, and yet the gigs are paid lower. Not the big gigs, but general. If you're a sort of general gigging circuit comedian, yeah. So, and like you say, it's just appreciative is such a good word. I did a gig like it was right on the edge of like Essex um and not quite Norfolk, Suffolk, is it? I don't know, 2 counties. And it was a tiny little village. And it was like, I was like, where am I? I got there and I was like, what is this? Oh, God, this is going to be awful. And then it was brilliant because everyone was like, tonight there is comedy on. Most nights there is nothing on. And tonight there is comedy and nothing else. So we're all here and excited to see comedy. You compare that to London where they're like, there's so much going on. What do we do tonight? And it was so great to play this gig where it was like a Thursday night and this whole town had come out just because, nothing else to
do. Do you learn a lot more from doing those? Because there's a lot of gigs in London, so you could maybe iron out a bit of new material. But I mean, in terms of actually learning and playing different rooms and all of that, but would you learn more just gigging lots of different places rather than,
Yeah.
I don't know, going through the London circuit, projecting to the big clubs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think as well, depending on your style, like if you're like me, I'm kind of alternative. So you've got to go to different places because sometimes they can go, what the fuck? And you can't just go, weird little town. You have to go, no, what could I do to bring those people inside? And how could I think of it differently? And if you're a political comedian, you have to travel. Like you can't just sort of do a gig in London every week and just be like, the Tories, I don't think they're very good for the country. And everyone's like, yeah. Well, okay, we'll go and do that in some Tory stronghold where even after everything that they've been through, they'll still vote Tory. You just got to do it. I don't really do much political stuff, but I still feel that you learn so much more by doing gigs in different places. At my last show this year, I did the most previews I've ever done before going to Edinburgh, and I did Brighton, Buxton, London, Leicester, and it was so good. Derby and Bedford, to do all these different places when I was doing like developing work in progress of a new show, because it did go down slightly differently in different places, and I learned so much. I did the Museum of Comedy a couple of times, and I love it there. I could have done that every other week until the show was finished. But by going to other places, I learned so much more because the audiences are so different in the terms of their expectation and what they're used to.
Is Edinburgh also quite cliquey?
Definitely, yeah. It's Edinburgh is just the London circuit, but they move it up for a month, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah, it is cliquey, yeah, but it's it is, and I think it's a weird thing for me because I sort of a bit of a cult comic, a bit of an outsider, but also at the same time you talk about cliques, like I am sort of accepted in other places and get nice gigs, and I did a nice little Edinburgh venue. So it's a weird thing when you sort of got one foot in a clique somewhere and one foot on the outside going, you guys will just go and watch each other and laugh at each other every night. But yeah, Edinburgh definitely has that kind of feeling. Yeah.
Well, what do I want to say? Did you do the PBH fringe or did you do the?
Yeah.
Oh, bloody hell, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I really admire you and Fiona Ridgewell. I'm like, because you broke what everyone seems to say, where, oh, you got to be in the Pleasance or Monkey Barrel, or you got to be in the paid stuff. And
yeah, the Pleasance and the Monkey Barrel are the two big ones where you're going to get the most press and industry attention. But in terms of what's right for you, that might not be, depending on what kind of comedian everyone is. Like, it's about finding what's right for you. It's definitely for me. And Fiona was in the exact same venue as me. She was just a bit earlier in the day. So we were both in the chamber room of the Banshee Labyrinth. And I didn't really know Fiona. I'd gigged with her once or twice before. So I didn't really know her very well. And then we all sort of got together on that first day when we had a sort of get in type day and a tech day sort of thing for an hour. And she was lovely and she was great. And so I feel like I bumped into her a few times during the month, and feel like I know her a little bit better now. And we both actually said, not bad for a dusty little free fringe room. I've got no comedy management, and she's new. It's her first show, and we were both in that little basement of a haunted pub on the PVH free fringe, and both did quite well, you know. So it was, yeah, hopefully that gives other people faith that you don't have to be in that little clique elsewhere.
Does I'll just say one more thing on that. With the PBH, do you need to? So you have to. It's advised that you paid a volunteer donation, and I think people say you need to do that to be in with them. But is it? It's cheaper than a Laughing Horse, isn't it? But do you have to pay anything to be in the? You still have to pay £400 if you want to be in with the book and the app.
Yeah, so my expenses, my cost for Edinburgh this year, I don't know if this is useful, is I had to, well, no, I didn't have to. I paid the brochure fee. And by paying the brochure fee, yeah, it was like 340 quid, I think, with the early bird discount in March. That put me on the app, which they didn't have last year. I wasn't there last year, but this year, 2023, had the app again. And on the free fringe, that was so important because there's a little button that says near me now. It's like in 10 minutes, there's one over there, there's one down. Okay, let's go to that one. So I paid that. PBH didn't pay a single thing. They don't pay the Banshee Labyrinth. The Banshee Labyrinth don't pay them. People just buy pints, and that's good enough for that venue. But then at the end, there is a suggested donation in the same way that we suggest at the end of our free fringe shows that you might give a donation. There's no obligation to do that. And they say that they don't keep an eye on who has done it. I don't know. I gave one because I think they deserve it, and otherwise it would just die, I guess. But they suggested like £3 to £5 per show. So I think I did 16 shows. I can't remember what I gave, but compared to what I would have paid Underbelly or Pleasance or Assembly, that would have been hundreds, probably about £1,000.
Have you tried Laughing Horse? What are they like? Because I did them this year,
Laughing Horse, yeah.
But they sort of enforce you to pay 400 something pounds, so it's similar to PBH if you want to be in a brochure. But what was it that put me off about you can't do pay ahead with PBH, can you?
No. See, with PBH, they are very specific about how they run things, and it's quite scary at times, but it works for them, and so that's why we all sort of go along with it, because it does work. Like I say, I had a good run, so I won't question it. But yeah, there's like Laughing Horse and other places, Just a Tonic, you can book ahead, you can turn up, you've got a bit of flexibility. So you might say to yourself, oh, it's a Friday and I've got this many pre-bookings. I don't need to fly. I can go and watch something. I go and enjoy myself. I can lay in bed. With the free fringe, PBH free fringe, you don't know who's going to turn up because no one can pre-book, no one can reserve a ticket. All you do. So you're like, is anyone going to turn up tonight? Every single day for a month. And you have that panic and worry. Even though eventually you start to think, well, people are turning up every day, so it should be fine. But yeah, maybe it'd be easier if you could reserve a seat. But then the problem with reserving a seat is some people reserve a seat and then don't turn up. So who knows?
But I have found that when people pay ahead, they tend to show up. Now I don't really run free shows. Before I used to, but now each show I run is ticketed.
Yeah.
And people like convenience. Like there's a gig that I run in Wimbledon and it's £6, but it's only £6 because it's a free drink. So the venue gets £3, I get £3.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And it's a bring your own booze thing. So they don't make much money, so I have to split the ticket cost with them in some respects. Yeah. But we get a lot of people in.
Once they've actually paid that money, they're like, that's what we're doing tonight. Yeah, as opposed to just plans change if you haven't, if you don't book ahead or if it's free, then people just like, can you be bothered to go? Should we stay here and have another pint? And then you lose audience. But yeah.
Yeah. And it's a funny thing with Laughing Horse. I didn't I went with them this year, but I got 12:30 in the afternoon, which was a very difficult time.
Yeah.
I did a lot of flyering and I barely got anyone in. So eventually when I did the flyering, it really sort of, because people were taking flyers and I was doing a costume as well as Zoa.
Yeah.
And the thing is, right, they were taking flyers, but no one was coming in. So eventually it was starting to beat down on my spirit.
Yeah.
But one of the things is the show wasn't ready as well. I also need to be very careful. One thing that I definitely learned from it, some comics have said, no, you're wrong in that, but I think I'm definitely right in this, in that with your design, with the show poster, with the description, make sure like it fits the type of comedy you do and you attract the right people. You be very specific, because if they misunderstand it, or You attract the wrong sort of people. They get the wrong expectations. They come home disappointed. You have a bad show.
Yeah.
If you be very clear about what you do and
Uh-huh.
what your act is, and like what they're going to expect, that's the main thing that I got out of it.
Definitely, that's such a good point. I mean, years ago, I used to be in a sketch show, and someone said to us, "You have to write sketch show on your poster." And I was like, "But it's just a comedy show. We're called Lead Pencil, and it's a really fun poster, and there's reviews and stuff. Everything you have on there is a write sketch show." And so we did. And actually, it's such a basic thing. But if people go, "Well, we should go and see that. What is it? It's a sketch show." No, it's sketch comedy. Or like, "No, I want some stand up, or I want some serious theatre." You just have to be as clear as you possibly can with what you're delivering. And the same with my show was originally called Dave Bibby Remakes Jurassic Park while trying to bring up a baby, which is basically what the show is about. And then it became Baby Dinosaur because I didn't want it to just be Jurassic Park fans come and see the show and then be disappointed when it kind of goes in slightly different directions.
Yeah.
Or put off people that are like, "Oh, is that Jurassic Park?" So there was enough in there that if you're a Jurassic Park fan, you'll like this, but it wasn't so overtly, this is a Jurassic Park tribute show, that would put people off. Like, "I've never seen that film." So it's a real balancing act of like making sure you know what you're putting out there, and writing those blurbs is an art form. Like, they're so short. Like, how do you put across what you're trying to do? And they ask for your blurb in like April, and you're like, "Mate, I haven't written the show yet." But yeah, and that's what Edinburgh. The best thing about Edinburgh is finding your audience. Because the circuit has its other bonuses and what's really fun about doing a comedy circuit, and other challenges. But if you're going to do festivals, it's about finding your audience, building an audience that will come back and see you and will tell their friends. And like, if you're clear about what it is that you're doing, then you will find them. And it's a bit of a cliche, but you'd rather have 10 people in your room who are like bang up for it and they're into your style of humor than have a packed out house who are like, "Oh, this is not what we were expecting."
Yeah, that's exactly what I got. I had a funny thing. It was a Spanish guide to learning Shakespeare, and it wasn't enough Shakespeare and it wasn't enough Spanish in it. And that's because a lot of things, this is what happened. I wasn't sure I was getting a show. So I thought I was going to go up. Then Laughing Horse offered me it. I probably should have refused it because they chose 12:30. It was a difficult time and I didn't have enough preparation for it. It was also, I think, in some respects, when I did my previous show, then maybe I burnt a few bridges, and that's why they gave a bad. And also, there's a few people that are in with Laughing Horse that I wouldn't say that I'm on good terms. They're not. Yeah, okay, fine. In that clique, I don't think I get on with them. So they probably said something towards him, and then that's why I got the. But you got to be smart about it. If there's a few people in that clique who don't particularly like you, you're gonna get some dodgy things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's how it works, isn't it? And it's a balancing act. I think that's why people use agents and managers and producers, because then they can deal with all that stuff, like programming at this sort of time. Then you can get a couple of offers. Like, "I don't want that. I don't want this." So go back and ask for this. But when you're doing it yourself, you're just like, "Oh yes, thank you for the slot." Or, "I appreciate it." You don't want to annoy anyone. But you can have if you have a producer, which I didn't have, so I don't really know what I'm talking about. But you have that benefit of someone's fighting your corner a little bit, or maybe they're in that clip. They've got 5 acts. I've got this guy's a really big name. She's got won the award last year for this, and this newcomer, and then you say, "Okay, give us slots for all these 5 or whatever." It's a different, it's a different way of doing things, isn't it? And you just got to learn how to get into those places or how to negotiate those things. And you just learn, like you say, if you learn every time you do it, you get better. You'll be fine.
And who do you kiss the ass to? No, I'm joking.
Exactly. Whose ass have I got to kiss to get where, or who I want? Yeah.
But it is but it was, yeah. A lot of people try and make rules in comedy. Like, so many people say, like, "Oh, they hate musical comics. Oh, if you're not doing the joke stand-up club set comic, you're not a comedian."
Yeah.
And I found in the UK and America, it's quite strict on that. But in countries where they're just emerging with comedy and they've learned from us, they're even more religiously in that being that type of comedy. So I'll do something in my Zorro costume and different things, and I'll get comics who have maybe visited or come then they'd be really, where's tell the joke.
Yeah,
Listen, as long as the guys are laughing, it
yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, people love to sort of also say like what's fashionable, what's in this year, and that is forms of comedy, like you say, musical comedy or one-liners or storytelling or character comedy, and also like the subject matter. So a few years ago, there was a lot of shows about being working class or not being working class, and then this year there's a lot of shows about um, neurodiversity and things like that. And it's all really positive because I think like we should be lifting these people up, but also you notice those other people like jumping on the bandwagon, and I was like, you're not working class. What the fuck are you doing here talking about class and stuff like that? And so yeah, people just love to pigeonhole and get like hot topics, hot styles, hot names, whatever it is, and then we end up with a lot of the same stuff and not less of the unique voices.
What do you make? So I've come across a few acts that are a bit alternative, like me and obviously yourself, but some of them will bend over their act to fit into certain clubs or fit into certain places. And I feel that if you do that, you're going to take away the amount of time to perfecting sort of the comedy you want to do and that you're really good at.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm part of me's like with the Zorro costume, I did a gong show and I did a lot of my old jokes, and for whatever reason, they work quite well. Like I did my opening joke, I'm dressed in the Zorro costume. People were laughing already. And
yeah,
that says, I go, let me say why I look like this. I'm half Chinese and half Irish. And I go, that's because I'm a hardworking alcoholic. And they laugh like mad at that because I was dressed in a Zorro
yeah,
costume. And
yeah,
then I did a lot of the old jokes and it worked quite well because I didn't prepare for it. But I was thinking I could have, if I really wanted to, I reckon I could beat a lot of gong shows dressed as Zorro doing the joke punchline thing. But
yeah.
I'm thinking it's not really the comedy that I want to do or I'm interested in.
Mm,
And if I spend so much time on that just to fit in a certain group so that people will like me, it's going to
yeah.
take me a time of perfecting what I'm better at.
There's also two things going on here. There's exactly what you say. There's you're like, am I wasting stage time on something that I don't really want to pursue? And also, it's that classic thing of you never know who's watching. And if you go and do one style of comedy and the promoter says, mate, you were great, come back and do the Saturday night show, or there's someone from TV or radio or an agent in the audience, and they're like, we love that. And then they book you for something else and then you do something completely different. They're like, oh, that's not what we're expecting. So again, it's kind of like whatever it is you want to do and where you want to be, you got to stick with it, which is much harder, I think. Or maybe you can play that thing of give them a couple of the gags just to sort of show that you can do it, and then step aside from that sort of thing and do your more alternative thing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Do you, so when you were doing your sort of show and you do your club set, has any of it interspersed? Because I speak to Matt Price and he says so many times he'll get stuff that works in Edinburgh show that he cannot do in a club set.
yeah, yeah, totally. So that's one of my big regrets from the last kind of two shows I've written is that they've both been a narrative in a way, and they've been each show's been getting better and better. And like this one's probably the best show I've written. Um, but there's really not much. There's a few little gags that are part of something else that I could take out and do in a club set. But otherwise, I'm not gigging as much as I used to or probably should be because I just don't have the time. This is kind of what the show's about. I've got two young kids, and like if I'm going to put my effort in somewhere, I made a decision. Like, should I do online TikTok type comedy? Should I do a festival show, or should I just really focus on the circuit? Because in all truth, I didn't have time to do all of them. So I wrote a narrative show, and that was brilliant, and I loved it. But it is like I get offered gigs, and then I'm like, oh, what do I do? I'm gonna have to do old material because I've spent all this time writing this narrative show that, taken out of context, there's only a few gigs that it would actually work at. So yeah, it's very tough, I think.
Do you how do you manage it? Do you split like certain days of the week you focus on this, certain days of the week you focus on that, and certain days of
Yeah, I think I have sort of limited time, and like I also find that I am very busy at different times of year. So like January and February are my most quiet months. I'll be very busy in December. I'm very busy in September. Edinburgh, if I go to sleep, takes August out. And so I have to kind of plan my year a little bit way ahead. And if I'm going to do Edinburgh in August, I'd need to know about it before Christmas the year before. And then I'd have to dedicate a lot of January to just writing to then sort of preview in the spring. And yeah, you just have to divide it up. But it's just deadlines, isn't it? That's why I'd also book other fringe festivals like Brighton and Leicester and stuff, because if someone books me for a stand-up gig, I will write material or work on material so I can go and do a good job for them. And if I book myself a 1 hour slot at Brighton Fringe, I will write that show. So it's just like whatever is on the horizon, I'll just have to meet that deadline quite usually by the skin of my teeth, but that's it. But yeah, in my style of comedy, I would sit down on a separate document, if you like, or a separate way of thinking to say, this is my festival show, this is my club stuff. And there's a slight grey area in between, but they're quite separate, really.
How much? So for a lot of people thinking right now, I don't know that you hear stories about people starting their first doing comedy. Well, I'm going to do an hour Edinburgh show, and for those that are too optimistic and they're not quite ready yet, how much effort does it take to produce a Edinburgh show on a budget that wins an award?
Um, I think I spent a fair amount of time. Well, like I say, there, even if you just take out the work in progress shows, what I did a date at Leicester, and then I did the Museum of Comedy, and I did 2 dates at Brighton Fringe, and I went back to the Museum of Comedy, and I did the Hen and Chickens, and I did 3 dates at Buxton Fringe, and I did Derby and Bedford. So that's 11 shows before I even got to Edinburgh. So, uh, and a lot of people would do more than that. You talk about a fair amount of work, but it just depends on your style as well, I think. But I I just wrote an hour once and went to Edinburgh, and there's big benefits because you get better, you improve, uh, you learn so much about yourself, your style, and everything else. But if I were to give advice to new comics, it would be sure, go to Edinburgh and do a split bill. The first year you go should just be as a punter, maybe doing a couple of gigs. And then the next year, when you're applying for spaces, someone says, I'm going to offer you this Laughing Horse time slot space, or I'm going to offer you this Pleasant slot. And you know what they're talking about because you're like, oh, that's where I saw that guy. Or, oh, yeah, I know where that is. That's way out of town. Or, it just gives you an idea of this big beast that Edinburgh is. So there are benefits to just throwing yourself in there. But I guess it's hard to quantify exactly what it is, but it's a lot of work to write a 1 hour show. But for some people, that's just what they need to do. But for most people, I think you're better off slowly building it up.
How much? But so did you do it like a year in advance, the show that you got an award from Amused Moose, or was it even longer than that?
So part of the show, I kind of talk. The show is kind of biographical, so it's actually kind of true. So like, I did a show in 2019 called Crazy Cat Laddie, and while I was up there, there's this sort of trend for doing like one man Star Wars and one man Game of Thrones and one man Breaking Bad, as it was those popular shows those years ago. And I thought I'd love to do a one man Jurassic Park, and I would use the audience and do interaction stuff, but we'd do the movie Jurassic Park. And then I had a baby in 2020, and the world shut down, pandemics and everything else, and so I put it back, and I never really did any more work on it other than I'd like to write a show that had a baby. And then so in 2021, I started writing a show that I was going to then take to Edinburgh. And then that got put back. So I did a tiny bit of work on it. And then it was only this year or at the end of last year that I was like, okay, I need to do this show. So it had sort of been in the making for a few years, but in terms of actually working on it, that didn't really start until January this year.
Oh,
Yeah. Then I really sat down, but I'm sort of thinking about what my next show is, right now we're sort of end of September recording this, and I'm already thinking to myself, okay, but my last show, like I said, I started writing it in January, but this time last year, I kind of knew what the show I was going to be writing was. So even though I hadn't actually sat down and started writing it, I'd been thinking about it. It had been mulling over in my mind. And now I'm like, right, I'm going to write a new show, and I've got loads of ideas, but I don't specifically know what that is. So it's a weird thing when you start writing a show. Sometimes you get one that's like, I've got an idea for a show, and you write towards completing that idea or fulfilling that idea, that vision. And other times you're like, I'm going to sit down and write a new show, but I don't really know what it's about. And that kind of show is going to take a lot longer. And they're the kind of shows you probably need to collaborate with someone else. That's what I'm thinking at the moment. The last show I did all on my own. I didn't really have a director or management, PR, anything. I think this time I should probably get at least a director.
Bloody hell! That's no. Oh God, well, that's it, isn't it? If you're poor, you can't afford that. You got
It's
to do
as
it all
simple as
yourself.
that.
That's where.
It's as simple as that, man. It comes down to money. Or some people are good at doing arts council applications, aren't they? And the arts council give them money, and they do a development week for a few weeks, and they hire people that are good to help them out. I sort of do wonder how good my show could have been if it wasn't just me sat in the shed in the bottom of my garden thinking of ideas of jokes about dinosaurs. Because it was a pretty good show, but I'm like, well, how good could it have been if I'd had the budget to bring in other people?
Well, you've you've really put into a weird analogy here, but I've watched. There's this YouTube channel called TIFL, I think, where they analyze a lot of football matches, and they
Right.
look about how Brighton are able to get a lot of top players at a
Uh-huh.
cheap rate, and a lot of big teams are, and
Yeah.
that's what I feel it is with because I watched some shows that some
Uh-huh.
of them were amazing, like some of the award winners and all that, but they had everything the way they wanted it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
the creativity maybe isn't as there as if someone has like I had a guy on a podcast, he's a mime artist, and he says a lot of creativity comes from when there's barriers and you
Mm.
have to work your way around them.
Yeah.
And one of the
Yeah.
things of being poor myself as well, you got to look you don't get as blinded by things that pretend to have value, like
Yeah.
life coaches and all of that, and you find what works. How
Yeah.
do you, what's your seeing that you had to do everything on yourself, how
Yeah.
did you be able to decipher what's bloody useful, what's a load of shit?
Yeah. That was, I think just testing it out was the main thing. Like I say, taking it to different places. So you have to just swallow the fact that you have to get it out there as soon as possible, put it in front of an audience, and then be like, God, that bit is shit. That bit I do need to cut, and just listen to anyone and everyone. You don't have to. If someone says, I didn't like that whole bit that you did about when you did that song, if several people say that, there's a problem. If one person says it, you go, well, what is it that I haven't quite communicated there? But yeah, it's just the same in all walks of life, isn't it? You see like busy parents who like picking the kids up from school, or whatever. Like they have to be productive in a much shorter space of time than what they had been previously before they had kids and had to drop them off at school and make their dinner and put them to bed at night and everything else. And it's just like you say, those barriers sometimes make you so focused, because like I literally before I might have had all day to think about something and I had the time and probably a bit more money, and now I've got this 2 hour window where I've said I'm going to work on the show, and it's so hard. But then I guess it's like all the best things are, people don't just run a marathon and just be like, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow, do you want to join me? No, you better have been training for it for months, and then that feeling that when you've done it is all that more impressive and feels amazing because of the hard work. And you just got to crack on, haven't you? Just got to keep doing it.
So one of the this is third I think I'd say second-hand advice, because there's a great comic called Moamar. I'm not too sure if he's still doing it anymore,
Mm.
but I had a chat with him and he got some advice from Tom Stade when he was supporting him. And Tom Stade, what he used to do when he was doing a show is he would do 10 minutes for each month. And
Mm.
what was your process for developing each bit as you gradually built it up to an hour show and make sure it was ready? And I mean, you got an Amused Moose Comedy Award, which,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever the case is, that is a nice shiny thing to take you to so many different places.
Yeah, it's
And
in
like
there
if you're in
somewhere.
another country or whatever, boom.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's something. I've been lucky enough to win a couple of awards, and this is the first time I've won something for like my show, my creation, as opposed to just like a set somewhere. Like I won a musical comedy award, and actually this show got. But just before I went to Edinburgh, like I said, I did Buxton. I got nominated for 2 awards at the Buxton Fringe Awards. At that point, the show wasn't finished, and Edinburgh's only a few weeks away. But it didn't half give me a real boost of confidence. Like, wow, this show can be good. I just need to find the time to really finish it. So you know what, like that Tom Stella advice, that's really good. Like breaking something down into practical, manageable chunks. For me, I'm just a big mess. My writing process is just like keep writing and writing and writing. And for if you're a one-liner comedian or something like that, 10 minutes is quite a lot to develop. My problem is when I start writing, I'd write hours of material, ideas for jokes, sketches, characters, choose your own adventure games. This is like what my shows are. And it's more like editing it down. That's the big thing for me. So I just keep going over it and over it and over it until I've found the little diamonds that are the bits that I need to keep and work my way back from there. I think that I don't know that most comedians would be like that in terms of like you talk about how much material you need to develop. I'm like, how much material do I need to cut? Because ideas flow out of me, but then that's my problem. Do I have the ability to cut them back? That's what takes me time. And do I choose the right ones? The stuff on the cutting floor that people have never seen from that show that probably might have been better, but I don't know.
So with a lot of the situations is you have to be very precise with your time and
Mm.
you've got to make a lot of tough decisions
Yeah,
effectively. That
yeah,
would that be what's got your show to where it was, making a lot of
exactly.
tough decisions.
Making tough decisions to say what am I trying to say? What is the point of this as a whole and of this bit? And how does that lead to, so like I said, it's a narrative show. So there's just little story points in there. If I want that bit at the end to really hit hard, I need to have laid the foundations here. Have I done that? And then sort of, going back and doing it and peppering it in throughout, really. That was the key for me. But it's a funny process writing because even with me, it's slightly different every time. Um, just depends what it is you're trying to write. Um, but the big thing for me is, and I think a lot of creative people, is deadlines. And that's why Leicester Comedy Festival is so funny in the way it's placed. Because in the festival calendar, it happens in like February. So London used to have Vault Festival in January, tad early, but was still something. Leicester Comedy Festival, the people of Leicester have got used to seeing comedians on stage with notepads because they're going to be going to Edinburgh in a few months. And what they've got right now is going to be good one day. And that was a big thing for me. In some ways, I don't have confidence. I don't think I'm a very good comedian. I don't think I'm very good at it. And in other ways, there's little thing that, no, you are good. Just set that deadline. And that's what got me through. Around this time last year, probably around maybe a bit later in the year, I set a deadline of Leicester Comedy Festival in February. If that had gone well, I'll talk to PBH and maybe a couple of other Edinburgh venues. And if something good comes in, that's my other deadline, August, Edinburgh Fringe. There's a big gap, February to August, in the comedy calendar. So I created more deadlines. A London show in May, 2 Brighton shows in May, another London show in June, and then packed July full of tighter deadline. Each time the deadline was the gap between shows is getting shorter and shorter because I need it was more tweaks as opposed to massive changes. But from the first time I did comedy, it was just a case of book a gig and I'm too proud to die on my ass. I'll go and write material because I've got that gig in my diary. And I'm still doing that now. That was a 5-minute set all those years ago. And now it's a 1-hour show. But if I keep booking deadlines, I'll do something eventually. And the first time I do it, it'll be rubbish, but eventually it'll be good.
Yeah. So you know that what your weaknesses is, and then you
Yeah,
know how you work, and so that's why you put the deadlines for it, so it forces you. Otherwise, you would fool
yeah.
yourself into a false sense of security.
Exactly that. Yeah, exactly. If I was just writing for months and months and months, like this is great, or it's not so good, but I'm getting there, and I'd get to Edinburgh, I'd be like, oh, I need to make changes. This is not quite right. I have to set those deadlines earlier on to make sure I do it. But I remember, like when I was at school, they used to say that on average, boys did better in exams and girls did better in coursework. And they're obviously different. People are slightly different, but how different minds work, like different personalities. Like for me, I remember someone saying that because I thought to myself, that is absolutely me. If there's an exam, I'll cram last minute, get to that exam, and I'll probably do okay. If there's coursework and you're giving me what 3 months to write something like a whole summer term to write an essay about To Kill a Mockingbird, I'll spend the first month. I might watch the film or something, but that's about it. So it's just like, but for other people, going away and slowly writing a show is what is for them. For me, I need to be under pressure, otherwise I won't do it.
Hmm. And and another thing, I think, yeah, that sound practical sort of advice.
Hmm.
Listen, smart goals, guys.
Exactly.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relative, and timely.
Yeah, exactly. Put yourself under some pressure. You'll be better for when you get out of it.
And with a lot of Edinburgh shows, it's almost like they're big, like film productions in a way. With
Yeah.
an like they have the tech, they have all of that. So
Mhm.
when you're doing a show like you did with the baby and the dinosaur, how did you make things sort of good without those financial, like Manchester City
Yeah.
have?
Yeah, exactly. Who's the Manchester City of comedy? Let's not go into that. Who's the Newcastle? Who's the new one that's just been filled with money from other places? No. Um, yeah. So what I did is very much made that part of my show. I put that responsibility on the audience. I use a lot of interaction, and I basically told the audience, we're going to work together to make an epic Hollywood movie. We don't have the budget to make a Hollywood movie. We don't even have the normal fringe budget. We have a free fringe budget. And so it made the audience feel part of the creation of something. So in my show, Baby Dinosaur, the audience did the sound effects. So the screen behind me would say the sound of wind, and the whole audience would like, and then I'd be like, it'd say stampede of dinosaurs. People are stamping their feet or shouting stuff out, and then things become more surreal. And I created that sort of epic feeling every night by getting the audience to do it. And that's what I really loved about it. I think that's what people liked about my show, was the fact that it was very old school fringy. Like people could see this guy is working on a budget, and uh and we're all part of making it as good as it can possibly be. He's asking the audience to do that. Um and then it's just like tiny little things of like careful lighting changes, even positioning. There were kind of three strands in my show. There was me just talking, like doing stand up. There was me doing the movie, like doing comedy versions of scenes of Jurassic Park. And there was me talking about fatherhood, which was funny, but kind of genuine. And a tiny thing I did was a lighting change in between each of those three things that the audience may or may not have even noticed. But it was enough to move them. So when I was doing the movie, I was up on stage and usually had people up on stage with me. I was big, I was narrating it, and I was near my sort of clipboard that had my Jurassic Park quote unquote script on. Okay. Because most of the time I wasn't actually reading it, but it was like I'm narrating a movie. Then there was me stood center stage talking about what's coming up next, doing sort of stand up, preparing us for the next scene. The third place was me stage right, sat down with basically just a spotlight or whatever minimal light I could have, talking about parenthood. And then when I stood back up, I was like, right, scene 5. We're now flying to Jurassic Park. And there was an instant little change. And that tiny little thing was created for nothing other than that when we're in this part of the show, I'm sat there. When we're in this part of the show, I'm stood here. And the lighting is red and dramatic because it's a movie. When I'm sat there, the lighting is very minimal because it's just a bloke called Dave talking about having kids recently. And these are tiny little things that really don't cost anything, but I think they do add a certain amount of production value to a show in terms of storytelling, I think.
And they were all because of the things you do outside of comedy, that like being a voiceover, being an
Mm.
actor. If you didn't do those things, you wouldn't be aware of those things. Like
Yeah,
working the lighting,
yeah,
directing.
yeah. I think that's true, but I think a lot of that has come from watching comedy, and this is again why I'm a bit worried about writing my next show in a shorter amount of time. Is that what I really love to do is watch loads of comedy, because even if you forget about it, even if you see a show that's kind of not so good, you'd be like, actually, I love the way they started that show, that they started it in character, but then they let a bit of themselves out. Or I like the way they use lighting for something. I like the way they just shifted that. And you just take if you can take one tiny little, not copying something, but being inspired by something, whether that's staging, lighting, the way they move between sketches, or the way they move between topics, or how they use the audience, the technician, how they end the show. If you take one little thing from each show or comedy night you see, then you're going to get so much better. And then when you come to sit down and write something, like, how do I bridge the gap between doing this weird character to then suddenly talking about something genuine? Like a lot of people in Edinburgh shows, they talk about the death of a parent, or like a breakup, like big things that are important to them. How do you bridge that gap? And if you've watched lots of comedy, even if you don't know you're doing it, you're thinking, well, I did see that guy, and he sort of, what he did was X or Y, like he shifted lighting, or he
Hmm.
used the projector. So I think it's a big thing of just watch, and like what you're doing, talk to people, listen to the podcast, and go out and see as much as possible. And you can take a little something. I was watching stuff on Next Up Comedy the other day. It's not the same as being live, but it is quite interesting.
Yeah. That you mentioned something that's interesting there. And one thing that I am gonna, which I did in my last podcast with Barnaby King, because not a single comic could break down how Vigo Venn was able to win the gong shows without any jokes. Whilst when
Yeah.
I talk to someone who's involved in the world of clowning and physical comedy, he was able to break it down. And that one of
Yes.
the things that I want to do in the podcast is actually get videos of comedians and their favorite bits, and then
Yeah.
breaking down how it worked.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's no Vigo would have been absolutely comfortable and confident going into any of those gigs, from Britain's Got Talent to a smaller gig in a back of a pub. That what he does and what he's been working on, he can win them over. And he's also, the thing with him is he's flexible enough to change if it's not working as well. And that's a big thing that it's hard to teach young comics, that kind of level of flexibility. You can see them doing the same set that they did last night. But last night you're in a student union. Tonight you're doing a corporate gig for 400 lawyers. You're going to have to slightly do this a little bit differently.
Have
But
you
that
performed
comes
with
with
him
experience.
and seen him do it, like where he's
Yeah, I've performed with Vigo. Yeah, not since he's won Britain's Got Talent. I think maybe he's gone to another level now. Maybe I'll never ever gig with him again. Uh, those days are over. But yeah, I've gigged with him a few times, and you can exactly see. I'm not a clown, but that's that one thing we do have in common. Each time we perform, it's slightly different. And that's the part of my fringe show that was fun. I was telling the audience exactly that. It's up to you guys tonight. You're part of my shows. And Vigo and any clowns, they'll be exactly the same. And it's sort of a risky game, because what if they don't go with you? But I guess someone like Vigo has just been doing it long enough that he has the confidence that he'll get there. Or if not, he'll be like, oh, well, do it tomorrow.
yeah. It's a bit like there's a podcast from a former Love Islander called Chris Williamson. He's not like those airheads and those muscle steroid guys. He's made something himself. He does a podcast,
Yeah.
and he's made Modern Wisdom. It's quite nice, but he says that a lot of confidence for men, but in particular, is when you have undeniable wins. And with Vigo, he's had a lot of that. He's won a lot of Edinburgh Awards shows.
Yeah.
He's beaten gong shows. He's done well in competitions. So before he went to Britain's Got Talent, he had the belief and knew that he was good.
Yeah. 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 I guess it also almost sort of fits his vibe as well, that had it not gone very well, he would have found that funny. as opposed to like someone who's doing material about that's very personal to them. If people don't like it, it's like, oh God, but he's putting a high-vis jacket on, whipping it off. It's going to either go really well or really badly. And that's the world that he lives in. And that's sort of the fascinating thing. And like I said before, like I have, like most creatives, like serious lack of confidence in my ability most days, but still that glint of, no, I'm definitely quite good at this. I know I am. I've been on stage however many times and people laugh. Comedy is instant feedback. And so, like, exactly that. I was doing a show this year that never would have been tipped by anyone in the run up because, well, I didn't have any PR to tell people that this is going to be a great show or anything else. But I quietly thought, within my own parameters of expectations, this could be pretty good. I'm quite funny. And then each time you get those wins, like you say, whether it's a physical win of an award or a win of like coming out of a gig like I did in Brighton. No one's ever heard of me in Brighton. I did a Brighton Fringe, turned up, show wasn't finished, it's still a work in progress, but had people like loving it coming up to me afterwards. I thought, okay, that's another step towards finishing this show. It gave me the confidence to write before my next preview. And you just have those markers of success and the warnings of failure, I suppose, as well. You have little moments that aren't so good, but if you can learn from those as much as the wins, then you're away.
What what was it like when you got the Amused Moose Comedy Award? Did Heel Jago come in and watch you? I don't know.
Yeah, that was a weird thing this year. So I was doing a free fringe and I wasn't doing the final week of Edinburgh. So I wasn't eligible for any other award. So the Fosters, or whatever it's called now, awards weren't coming to see me because I wasn't there in the last week. So I wasn't eligible. There was the Ish Awards this year, wasn't there? They weren't come to see me because I wasn't eligible. And then there are other things like the Neurodiversity Awards, and there are other different awards. The weird pressure of the Amused Moose was that that was the only award I was eligible for. That was the only one I could win. So winning it was quite wow. But they tell you when they're going to come. So if you're on paid fringe, they'll either ask, can we have a comp ticket left at the press office? Or if you're on free fringe, they're going to message us. They're messaging me individually. And it just felt like their judges, different judge was coming like every night. And I'd have a reviewer in, and the next night I'd have a judge in, and they just kept coming back and coming back. And like I say, I wasn't there for the last week. So I got a text on the Saturday, an email on the Saturday, the penultimate Saturday of the Fringe, which was my final weekend, saying, congratulations, you're a finalist in the Amused Moose Comedy Awards. Tomorrow, the Sunday afternoon, there's going to be a press launch. We want you to come and take photos, and you nominees are going to be announced. The winners will be announced in the final week. And I was like, I'm not here in the final week. So I went there on the Sunday. They took some photos of all of us. And then I went, and in the evening, about 5 o'clock, they announced. So Chortle, British Comedy Guide, everyone was like, here are your finalists for the Amused Moose. And then I was like, okay, I've got 1 hour to cash in on being nominated for an award because my final show starts in an hour. So word doesn't even get around very quickly. But I had loads of people messaging me. And then I did my final show, and I stood up and I went to do sort of my bucket speech, which was, thanks for coming. If you want to give some money, chuck it in or tap your card. And then I just heard excuse me, just before we all disappear. And I was like, that's Hills Jago. And Hills and the vice president of the Fringe Society came forward with this flashing moose. Where is it?
Oh, it is.
Flashing Moose Award out of the darkness of the Banshee Labyrinth. And they came up on stage and just said, they took the mic and said, did you enjoy the show? And everyone's like, yeah, we quite enjoyed that. And they sort of said, well, we really enjoyed it, and we'd like to present Dave with this award. So usually that award would have happened several days later, but it was the last chance. That's why I was convinced I wasn't going to win. It's like, I'm not going to be here. They like to present live on stage. But I was like, I'm on a train home on Monday. And so, yeah, I was a nominee for about an hour and a winner straight after that.
Whoa.
So, yeah, usually there's a few days of, oh, who's going to win? Here's the nominees. But actually, there were 3 awards. So there were still two other awards from Amused Moose that were to be announced. So the other people that were nominated were still in with a chance, and 2 of them won. There's a best newcomer and then another award. I can't remember what that one was called. But yeah, it was really weird seeing them. I didn't know what to say. Like, was I supposed to make a speech, or like, I was just like, thanks. Thanks very much. And I was also aware that the way the Fringe works is like, there's another act here in 10 minutes. Like, this is, thank you for giving me this award, but we all need to get out of here because someone else has got a comedy show to do. Yeah, but it was fun. Yeah, it was very fun. Very interesting.
Would you do PBH again, or would you go for the paid ones? Or are you going to be like, no, I'm going to stick with the guns, go with that, and see where it
Well,
goes?
I would love to hear anyone's advice because basically everyone's been in my ear saying, what you should do is do this show again, but take it to Pleasance Courtyard in a much bigger venue and just totally cash in. Take it to Melbourne Fringe, take it to Glastonbury, take it to Adelaide, take it to Toronto. And I'm like, there's an idea. Or I write a new show and I go back to PBH and I say, what about you put me in the same time slot in the same place, and the people that liked it will come back next year? And they'll be like, done. That might work. Or they might say no. But I imagine they'll be like, that works for us. And I can say, great. So at the moment, I'm not really sure what the best thing to do is. I'm slightly inclined to just write a new show and go back to PBH because that sort of works for me and my style. But yeah, this is like I say, if I had comedy management and producers, we'd all be sat in a room going, this is what's best for you, and everyone have our opinion. But it is always me. And at the end of the day, I'm going to choose one route or another, and I might get it wrong. My next move is a difficult second album. I might do something even better because of what I've learned, or I might get it all wrong. Who knows?
Yeah, and every dickhead has an opinion, don't they?
Oh, I called my wife just before I left Edinburgh, and she was like, "Congratulations, I've made," because I had some good reviews in it, and I was like, my head is. I was like, I want to come home. I was just like, it's too much. People I'd never even heard of, and suddenly were like, Dad, I've got an idea for you. You should go to this venue here. And I was like, everyone was just like, you've got to write it as a kid's show. People saying you've got to adapt it, make it a kid's show, because you write it as a kid's show, you can cash in. You can do the kid's show earlier in the day at Edinburgh next year, and you can do a new show in the evening. And I was like, these are all great ideas, but I'm like, it's too much. Like, I don't know where I go from here. And that's why I just need some time on my own, or with people that might be able to help me to just chat it through and figure out my next step. But everyone's got opinions.
You know what? I get that in comedy shows or when I'm performing, or I'll get, but the ones that give advice straight away are nearly always people that you wouldn't want advice from.
Yeah, so
And
true.
to deal with that, or someone always tries to give you an opinion on what you do, or they say this and that, or even they give you a bad insult. And one of
Yeah,
the things that I look at now is, do I respect this person as a whole?
yeah,
Are they
yeah.
someone that I should be taking advice from?
Hmm.
Do they know what they're talking about?
Yeah,
And that's what I try and do with that. So you
yeah.
should do this. No, I'm joking. No,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
You
that's what
tell
I
me
try
what to
and
do
do.
next.
That's what I
Yeah.
try and do in that situation.
And I've also been the third person in that situation where you're in like a green room and someone goes on and does a gig, does their set, and they come off, and someone else starts giving them advice. And you're sat there thinking, that is shit advice. Excuse me, I don't know if I should swear. But like, do I step in and say, because quite often you get those older comics who've been on the circuit for years and they're very good at what they do, but some of them are stuck at a certain level because that's how good they are, and that's fine. You might never know their names, but they're good circuit comics. And then they'll give advice to a newcomer, and you think, well, what this experienced comic knows is very valuable to a newcomer. But then you look at it and you think, they've just given advice to this newcomer that I'm like, that's not like, that's very outdated advice. Like, this newcomer's like written better jokes than you did tonight, but they just need to work on their stage presence and just need more experience or mic technique, really basic performance experience. And actually, you telling them to rewrite that joke is not good because it was a bloody good joke. uh, I guess, again, just experience. You just got to learn who to take advice from and how to implement or disregard that advice. It's hard. Like I said, I have certain confidence in my ability, but I don't know when to say you don't know what you're talking about and when to take that advice on. It's tough.
I'll say one thing that I've learned from doing the podcast for a couple of years about comedians and people who are good performers is often the people who are really good at what they do, they can go into great detail into what they do. and they have an
Yeah.
understanding behind the scenes. But
Yeah.
those who are not so good and pretend to be better than what they are can't.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you one situation that taught me the most. It wasn't actually from the podcast. It's from a situation that I had one of the nights that I ran in Wimbledon. There was a guy, I will not say his name, but he's been going for a very long time, and he says that he was a pro comic to get spots in that calf, and he lives near the area. But the thing is, I should have known this. Often, if someone's good, and then you probably hear something about them, or
Mm.
someone will say something. This person I'd not heard anything about,
Yeah.
and one of the things before the gig, I want to get, I tried asking different things about him singing or whatever.
Mm.
He gave a load of nonsense and didn't say anything productive. So that
Yeah.
should have been an indicator now that he wasn't going to be any good. But
Yeah.
I didn't see
Yeah.
that at the time. But
Yeah.
that's a lesson that I've learned now through doing the podcast and through, yeah. Often
Yeah.
a sign that someone isn't good at what they do, or if they're mediocre, they can't go into great detail about what they do
They can't
to be
explain.
good.
Yeah. 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 No, it's a good point actually. And I suppose then you can challenge people who are giving advice. So if you think they've given you some advice, and you're not if you're asking them to quantify it, well, how would you edit that joke then? How would you make that snappier? And sometimes there's a great comic called Tony Cowards, who's like a one-liner
Yeah.
comedian. He's been around a long time, and what he can teach you about the basics of good gag joke writing is brilliant. I remember once he said to me, put that word at the end of the sentence because that word is the trigger for the laugh. And I'd put it a few words earlier. And I was like, that's a good point. As soon as he said it, I was like you say, he'd specifically quantified what the improvement could be, as opposed to, I don't know if you do that bus joke, it sort of impacts on your next bit. What are you talking? What are you talking about? But I remember it's very specific. Tony saying, put that word there, bam, and then I would never tell that joke again the old way. Had to be, Tony's way. And exactly that. He had the experience of joke writing that he could put his finger on how and why that joke could be improved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what you said there is probably definitely a good bit of advice for anyone that's listening now if they want to detect BS.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Yeah. Definitely. Ask them to quantify. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting point, and that's difficult depending on who you are. If you're a musical comedian or whatever, because I'm not a one-liner type comic. I've got a few one-liners in my shows, but that's not really my style. I think you can get so much better at one-liner writing through the theory of it and through like the shape of jokes and things like that. Kind of what I'm doing, which is crowd work, and like what Vigo's doing. It is a lot more just doing it. You just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it until it's in your body, and you get better at it. And then you're learning those tiny little things, like I say, about like it could be a lighting change, it could be physically where you stand or sit on the stage, it could be the way you move into a character or whatever. It's slightly different, but you just have to make those tweaks yourself to improve your performance.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I mean, comedy in some ways is a bit like music because there's different kinds of, some are storytellers, some are one-liners. So I'm not really a joke writer. So the one thing that I can't advise them on is jokes.
Yeah.
But maybe I could talk about the performance because I'm more focused on physical comedy. I'm quite an absurd comic and a character comic. If I were to look at advice on my act as a whole, which isn't mostly jokes, I would have to ask a character comic like a Bunjo or a Mad Ron. Or if I was doing some sort of funny clown thing, I would have to ask someone like Vigo on it because he's qualified. Whereas if you're just a regular straight talking storyteller comic, that's not your field of.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, you have to be, and I guess probably it's the same, like I said before, about watching comedy, whether that's watching at the back of the club when you're on later or you've just been on, or going out and going up to the Fringe and seeing whole 1 hour shows, or paying whatever it is to see the shows at Soho Theatre these days. But then like moving away from being aware of what your style is and seeing lots of different styles, but then also focusing in a little bit maybe on your world. So if you are a musical comedian, making sure that you are seeing other musical comedians and and understanding, how they work, and also being then able to avoid what's like hack. I've seen certain news comedians do the same jokes. I think I really wish you'd got together in a room and discuss that, because you're all doing that same joke. Or like sketch groups gig together and stuff and put on nights together, because you'll learn so much from what each other is doing. I think it's sort of, stay in your lane is not quite the right phrase, but understanding your niche is key.
What you've given me an idea of a question that I find with the Edinburgh Fringe itself. Who was don't say the name of the comic, but what was a performance that you learnt from being bad, and what was one that you learnt from being good?
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Actually, there was one comic I saw who was built up quite a bit, and I was like, I really must go and see him. I'd never even heard of this guy until a few months ago, and now he's suddenly everywhere. And I went to see him, and I was so disappointed in his act, and the audience didn't even seem to laugh that much. It didn't for me seem to have that many laughs and be that impressive as a 1 hour show. And then I carried on seeing these great reviews and award nominations for this guy. And what we were saying before about finding your audience, it obviously just nailed on his niche of what it was he was trying to do. And I learned so much from the fact that accepting that not everything is for everyone. And he just decided that that's the style of comedy that he was going to do. And the way he even puts his posters and everything is quite, I am good at this. I'm quite self-deprecating in what I do. But actually, this guy had the confidence to put out there that he's, the next big thing in comedy. And so I sort of learned a lot from that. Other bad gigs, I'd learned from my own bad gigs more than anything else. And then I did see one act this year who is a bit older than me, and I'm 38. There's a lot of people that are in and around comedy in their 20s. So, I look at him as like, oh, you've been around for a little bit, and you were great. And then I saw him this year, and it was so brilliant, because he was so his own barrel of madness and craziness that I just loved it. And they were even like making jokes like, I forgot to do that joke tonight, and then he'd do it later on, go, it didn't work. But it was just he just put his whole personality out there so much that I was just like, I wouldn't recommend doing this. I don't think I could get away with it. He didn't mention them by names, but he even slagged off a couple of other tropes in comedy that are happening at the moment that people are it's really important that we talk about that. Or the way he did that is really interesting. And then he slagged it off, and I was like, brilliant. Hopefully now that bubble has burst. And he was just so good at him being him that I was just like, I just loved it. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And it was just his energy. It's hard to describe, because he wasn't a gag, like you say, like he wasn't a gag writer. What he sold was his persona. I was going to say personality, but I suppose it's a stage persona. He took the audience within the first few minutes, like, this is what this show is going to be about. I'm dressed like this, and that makes no sense to the show. And so everyone was like, well, who knows what's next? And he did it in such a brilliant way that I was just like, that was great. That was fantastic. And like you said right at the beginning, different comics, like you could do your jokes and win them over, or you could do what you really want to do. And it felt like watching this comedian who's a bit older than me. He'd figured that out a long time ago, whereas we're still like, is that right? Or should I use a bit of that and then do what I really want to do? This guy was just doing what he wants to do, and he was just like in flight almost. He just took off. It was so good. Let's just call it. It's Phil Ellis.
Oh God!
Right. I won't say the bad one, but Phil Ellis came on dressed as a cat, and then he did a joke about how it was going to be about the movie Cats, and then he changed his mind, and it was all just so funny. And the way his persona on stage won them over. And then he was even like, it's so bad when comics do this, but he got away with it. He was mentioning other gigs on stage. Like, the other night I said this and this happened, but he did it in such a way that was so funny that I feel like that was the one I learned so much. That's the one I learned most from this year, because I was like, I see a bit of myself in him, and if I can continue not trying to please other people and just do my thing like he's doing, I'll be okay.
I remember seeing him. You know what? I really feel bad about not watching him even more now because I wanted to see his show. But yeah, I saw him MC the Leicester comedy thing, and
Yeah,
he's so confident on stage. I even
yeah,
interacted with him, and I said
yeah,
in a big Zorro costume with a fly, I said, "Would you like to see Zorro's life?" And he goes, "I'd love to."
yeah. Nice guy, funny
Yeah,
guy. And yeah, I really hope we have more people like him in the industry, uh,
yeah,
because he felt individual, and it felt something special watching his shows. And I think that's in the age of like TikTok and Instagram comedy. And it's not that there's a problem with that. I think that that's an amazing thing. It's a separate conversation. But if we're going to do live comedy, if we're going to do live, how live can it be? How unique can it be to that specific night, that specific audience, that front row? Yeah, and he was doing that. He prepared a show and he was smashing it home in the brilliant way that he does. But he also just left that little bit of room for live comedy, saying that was going to happen slightly differently. And even in some instances, that was him getting the running order wrong. It was like, I just done he said, I think I just done a callback to a joke that I didn't do before. So now I've just given you the callback and I didn't do the one earlier on. And then that ended up getting a bigger laugh because he was, it was just funny. It was brilliant. Loved it.
but he's been doing it for ages, hasn't he? Like maybe 30 years, and he's got because he's been in the circuit, done a lot of the best gigs. He's developed. I couldn't give a fuck. I know I'm good at this.
Yeah. Oh God, that's powerful. Yeah, yeah. He's so good. And that's the same, like we see club comics. Like I say, sometimes I see someone who's going to be better, who's going as a newcomer, who's going to be better than the person who's further up the bill that night. But right now, it's some tiny, like their material is amazing, but it's tiny little things like that. What's his name? That Cockney comedian. Is it Jeff?
Jeff Innocent.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, it might be. The way someone like that walks to the microphone, delivers their first line in the most comfortable, confident way, right? It might not even be the best, not going to be the best gag you hear that night, but the whole audience goes, this guy knows what he's doing. Now we can just relax and enjoy it. And I think I need to get better at that as well. Get to a point where people are like, oh, we're in safe hands here. We don't have to worry. Like, should we walk out? Is this going to be any good? He needs another laugh quite quickly for us to get on board. No, this guy is good. He knows what he's doing. And yeah, I think Jeff Innocent is. You just maybe you can teach it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just think you just need to do it. You just need experience. You just need confidence.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, Phil and Jeff have got that from doing years of being at the top.
And taking the bullets.
Exactly. They would have had some bad nights along the way, I'm sure.
One of the things with Edinburgh, you said like it's like London but enlarged, and it's there's a lot of I mean, there's the two main things of Edinburgh right now are the accommodation, and there's a
Mm.
hell of a lot of crap in Edinburgh. I'll be honest, there's a few people in Edinburgh that I do not like, and I deliberately ignored them. But there's a big thing with the accommodation. I made the bad mistake of being quite far out and getting a bus in the city, which was a
Uh-huh.
big waste of time, and I should never have done that.
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts on the accommodation? Don't give too much information because otherwise you may not get the cheap accommodation. No,
Yeah.
but
There
yeah,
is
for handling
talk that
crap.
I don't know how much I believe it, but there is talk that there is some work being done. So next year it's going to be more attainable, but I don't know. The way it's gone, it only ever goes up. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think, like I think I said earlier on about like my advice would be to go up and see the Fringe, maybe do a few gigs, and then next year do a split bill, the year after do a full hour or whatever it is. And that sort of is partly about the stage stuff, but it's partly about everything else, like just understanding the city and how accommodation and how the blurb writing works and how to get a good poster and all of those things you just need to sort of figure out. And I think therefore you need a network in comedy. So the people that are at your level, like when you first start out and when you make that next step, trying to keep in touch with them, and then therefore everyone's in the same boat and they're looking for accommodation. If they know that you're going up and you're doing it, okay, we've got a 5-bedroom place that's in this location, it costs this much. Actually, here's my top tip: don't book anything. People will always that are better at doing admin themselves will usually do it. And if you've got a good enough network in comedy, people say, "Are you still looking for a room? Because we found this place, it's 4-bed and we've got 3 beds filled." And you're like, "Great, I'll take it." I think that's how I've always booked my accommodation. Apart from this year, it's just relying that someone else will have a room. But that is, it's still happening in the spring. I wouldn't leave it too late. And then, even then, oh, so-and-so's cancelled their show. We're looking to rent out this room. Someone else has done the research. Someone else has done the hard work. They've bought that flat or rented that flat for the month. Now you can just slide in there. So yeah, keep your network. Keep talking. I'm the best at this. Sometimes a bit of an outsider in comedy. But if you keep your network, be nice to people. They'll be like, "Doesn't he need a room as well?" Yeah, I'll message you. And then someone else does it for you.
I get a bit nervous with that because I'm worried that I know the amount of dodginess that goes on. Well, I don't know full of it because I'm not at the top of it, so I don't know the full. But I know, even at the level I'm at, I see a lot of dodginess. But I
Yeah.
don't trust comedians in terms of accommodation without. That's why I booked an expensive accommodation because
Yeah.
some of them were posting, but I was thinking, I don't know this person, I don't trust them. So what if I give them the money and then I'm bloody on the field somewhere?
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. The more people you can get to know and trust, hard as it is, the more confidence you can have, and then sharing a flat with them or something, because otherwise that alone can ruin your Edinburgh, let alone
Oh,
reviews, audience numbers, everything else. The accommodation alone can make or break your month.
how did you? What's your advice for dealing with the crap? Like you're gonna, if you're in comedy long enough, you're gonna find so many people that you're gonna find people that you do not like,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna find people that you don't get on with. And there's a lot of rubbish going on. Oh, I'm better than you, this and that.
Yeah.
What's your advice for handling the bullshit in Edinburgh?
Yeah, especially with Edinburgh. Edinburgh, like I say, is this little bubble, a version of the wider industry as a whole, the whole entertainment industry. We're just sucked into a tiny little bubble for a few weeks. And the key is really to understand that it's bullshit and understand that it's unfair. Like that, people talk like, how did he get that job on Channel 4? Like he's doing that for Comedy Central. Like probably because they've slept with someone or they're related to someone. If you're going to get wound up about that, you're not going to stand a chance. You just have to understand that it's unfair. Focus on yourself. I think in sport they call it, control the controllables, don't they? And with Edinburgh, you absolutely have to set yourself realistic goals and targets. Like for me, like going up without management, PR, and everything else, I had to make a decision. If I'm going to go to Edinburgh with all the costs that it comes with, I need to understand that I'm not going to get many reviewers. I need to understand that I'm not going to be in the line for the awards. And like I say, literally wasn't even eligible because I decided that I wanted to do a shorter run because I wanted to be home with my family, and I just couldn't afford to do that final week in terms of cost of childcare and things like that. So I set very realistic targets, and that was so freeing. So for me, it was just like, I want to perform every night and get better at doing what I do. I'd love to have at least a few sold out shows, even if it's just a couple of those Saturday nights. And then one other thing for me, I would have liked to have, and I think it probably is going to happen, take that Edinburgh show and do it at a nice, well-known London venue as a showcase, and to say to myself, I've sort of completed that run of when I sat down with an idea about Jurassic Park and then what I've delivered. So I think other people are like, you could talk to them halfway through the Fringe and you're like, how's it going? It's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, I had this. I mean, never anywhere on my list of goals was get a review from that publication or get any reviews. I think that's easy for me to say because I've been going a little bit longer. If you're brand new and you're like, I didn't get any reviewers, that's harder to take because the next time you do a show, you want to be able to put, absolutely hilarious short or whatever it is on there. But for me, I've got enough reviews that I can, fine. I've just garnered enough reviews just from doing the show a little while that if I want to put a post together with some quotes and some stars on, that's all bullshit. I can do it. But still, like, you'd see people getting upset about things. You're just like, is that really what you're here for? You're getting slightly upset about some student blogger giving you 2.5 stars or something. That's not why you wrote this show. And if you really, it's easier said than done, but if you make specific targets and goals, and then when something happens that gives you a little wobble, you're like, oh man, I can't believe I got that review, or I can't believe only 4 people turned up today. And you look back at what your target is, you say, actually, I've still ticked this off. I'm still working on that. I'm closer to that goal now than what I was before. Then it's just a manageable way of dealing with the bullshit. Because otherwise you're just going to constantly get distracted by other things.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. If you do Edinburgh next year, you can say what's realistic, what are realistic goals for me, and they should be. There might be certain ones, like I said, I did have that one of like I'd like to then finish the show at a good venue or a good festival somewhere else. But most of them were just, I'm just going to have some fun. I'm just going to write a show that's funny and that I enjoy performing. And on the back of that, people kept coming. If I'd said to myself, I'd love to be nominated for Best Newcomer at the Edinburgh Comedy Awards a couple of years ago, I would have had to have dedicated so much to that and then may have failed in that sort of task or goal. And then sort of think, well, what do I carry on? Or where am I now? Well, I spent so much time writing stuff that I thought that those judges would want that I have not got better at doing what's unique and specific about me. I've ended up doing that style of comedy that I thought they wanted. So yeah, it's so empowering to just be like, I'm going to Edinburgh. Really? Why? I like it. It's fun. It's funny. I'm going to do a show that is like really fun and dumb and silly. And like I say, incredibly live. Like I couldn't do this on YouTube, just wouldn't work. So I'm going to go to Edinburgh and do it and have fun that way.
And as Jurgen Klopp says, as you got him in the back, you've got to turn doubters into believers.
Turn doubters into believers. That's right. That's what I presented an event up at Liverpool just before Eurovision. They gave me a different character for each country. I was doing all these different country comedy characters, and that was the German one. I was Jurgen Klopp, and I was like, I'm going to keep it because I love Jurgen.
He's just
next to my Buxton Fringe nominations, didn't win those ones, but like I said, it gave me a little win on the way. Yeah, you're going to turn doubters to believers, Jurgen.
And for anyone that's listening right now and they're like, listen here, Sonny Jim, how do I find out about Dave Bibby? He seems like a cool chap. Where do I find out about his online shit, his podcast, his voice? Where do I go, Sonny Jim?
So davebibby.com is probably the first place to start. There's a video page on my website which just got like a back catalogue of like comedy songs and skits and sketches. There's not much stand-up on there because my sort of alternative stuff does work better live. And then there's, I love my footballers, me interviewing lots of different footballers and things like that on there. And then links to my socials. But if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at Dave Bibby. On Instagram, I'm at Dave.Bibby. I'm on TikTok, and I'll probably start actually uploading something at some point on there. I started doing it, and then I was like, I don't have time to do a live show and do TikTok, but maybe I'll come back to that. I'm on there as well, Dave.Bibby. So yeah, davebibby.com is my website. If you head there, you can then see some of my sketches and skits, and then I usually post upcoming gigs. And like I said, the Baby Dinosaur show, I'll probably do a couple more times in a couple of different cities while I'm writing this next one. So if anyone wants to come and see that, we'd love to have you.
All right. You know where to go, guys. Make sure you follow him on wherever he is. Where you can follow him down his house. I'll give you his address.
Yeah, give him everything. Postcodes.
I'll give you the phone number, everything, guys. And his Facebook too. No, hope you've enjoyed this episode. Give us a podcast review on Amazon or iTunes. Subscribe. I'll be publishing this episode this Sunday. Also, I'm going to be interviewing the next episode, Dog Cigar, a man who left comedy and is now a full-time magician. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys soon.